Alright, hello YouTube. This is Dmitry Andreev, and I am doing a web capture on a new computer, and I've got a few hours ahead of me, so I'm going to try to get this done in less than half an hour. Why not? I'm just going to jump into it, not because I'm a big fan of winging it. Okay, I am from time to time. But rather because I don't really know who I'm trying to impress. I don't think I'm trying to impress anyone. I think I'm trying to impress upon people, which is a very, and I figured why not update these ideas that I want to expound upon to the modern medium for modern audiences. I guess if I look you right in the eye here in the camera, I won't be able to see myself, and I feel like if I see myself, I'll have a better idea of nonverbal. So what I want to talk about today is this whole notion. Well, let's give you some context first. And keep in mind, everything that I say, there'll be contradictions in the things that I'm saying because I'm trying to live in two worlds at once. I'm trying to live in my own mental world, and I'm also trying to live in this world. And if have any chance of reconciling those two, I'm going to have to take part in some things which I wouldn't ideally do, but which I have to do in order to get this point across. So it doesn't mean that I'm espousing these things, but I'm using them as a means to an end. And one of them is prefacing with a story about my life, which is actually incredibly fascinating that you wouldn't know from the story. So I was in a bookstore earlier today, just killing time, and I finally decided to start reading After Virtue by Alistair MacIntyre. Now, Alistair MacIntyre is this brilliant, brilliant philosopher. He's still alive. He's been around for a while. I believe he's in his 80s. I could look it up, but you could look it up if you're that curious. I don't find the information to be that important for me. Maybe it's important for you. I don't know. And Alistair MacIntyre is a moral philosopher. He's sort of associated with both Christianity and communism. And you might, we might be neither of those things, in which case I have some distrust of you because an atheist who isn't a liberal is usually a fairly narcissistic person in my experience. But thankfully, I haven't known a lot of people like that. But he is interesting that way in that he actually attempts to reconcile Christianity with communism and tries to reconcile the church with with the state, essentially, the ideal state, or with the ideal church, not like in a utopian way, but in a more of a sense that this is just common sense to him. Like, obviously, if you were either a Christian or a communist, the one hand would wash the other. In the United States, it's a problem. Communism, all of the major politicians who are closest to communism have been part of the Democratic Party, whereas the Christians who are closest to fundamentalism, which isn't even necessarily pure Christianity, but there's a whole theological discussion there, they tend to be more on the Republican side. And then the libertarians are just all about one particular set of values. I guess that's where you get most of like the atheistic non-communists that I'm distrustful of. But even they have their virtues, like they're into drugs for one thing. And drugs can be a very dangerous thing, but it can also be a good first step for a lot of people to question their initial presuppositions because their minds are forced to think a different way when they use drugs. But for the most part, we have this strong Republican-Democrat split, for better or for worse, in our two-party system. It goes down to the core of our conflicts and how we see ourselves as part of political parties, which is one of the reasons I try not to see myself in either. I used to be a very staunch Democrat in high school. And somehow the notion is, if you're a Christian, communism is just not your thing. Communism is way too forced. And Christianity is supposed to be somehow immune to force. And so, despite the fact that a lot of these same conservative Christians are quite fundamentalistic, and they're quite violent towards people like homosexuals. And like, I'm not saying that homosexuality is necessarily something that I agree with. One of the things I'll be talking about is how I don't necessarily have to agree with it as a heterosexual. Um, but there is there is this sense of violence in Christian American culture, and it's a hypocrisy. I remember trying to convince some Christian friends I had that communism was a good idea. It was at a car ride, and at one point, one of them just snapped at me and asked, "What would happen if I stole your wallet right now? Would you be okay with that?" You know, this guy's psychotic. I just kind of stayed quiet about it because I was in his car. But it's like he literally his whole apprehension about communism is the notion that someone will part him with his personal belongings. And yet, even by having to interrupt the discussion at that point by threatening me, he was kind of affirming what Marx was saying about capitalism. And this whole notion that property is in essence theft, that everything is public property until someone says, no, it's just mine, and steals it from society. Well, there's nothing intrinsically Christian about doing that. And besides, it's dumb because obviously I wouldn't need that wallet if we were living in a communistic society. So it doesn't prove that we shouldn't be living in a communistic society. It's rather you reinforcing your own power in a capitalistic society in that situation. But good luck arguing with people who are set in their ways that way. Um, there are people who are not Christians, who are not communists, like I said. They're atheistic Republicans. And a lot of them simply just go by the law. They go by the status quo. They conform to what the group says. And they're not a lot of fun to be around after a while. They have some crazy stories, but fundamentally they're kind of psychotic. But Alistair McIntyre is a different breed. Alistair McIntyre is someone who really understood, with a lot of humility, when he writes, actually you really see how tentative this is for him, and yet how certain he is about what he wants to get across in this tentative way that only Capricorn writers seem to really have. It's another thing you'll get used to. You'll learn a lot of astrology from me. Alistair McIntyre really understood how Christianity and communism are aiming at the same basic goals. But I'm not going to expound on that right now so much as I'm going to expound on his notion of virtue ethics. I think only in the context of that can you really understand how Christianity and communism would be one and the same for him. And I haven't read his book on Christianity and communism, though I'm sure that I will. And I'm sure that I can already kind of imagine where he's going with it because it reflects my own opinions. And his thought has, even since before I read it, when I only heard lectures on it, his thought really informed my development into the far left and also at the same time into religion and kind of endeared me to both those groups, even though I was never fully a part of any one of those opposing factions, for which I'm, like I said, I'm very thankful that I could just take this individualistic path. Not individualistic in a rugged way, of course, but, you know, an individual path, a line of thinking which was my own. Because I think that that's the only thing that really can produce an authentic thing. And all of these people, by the way, either the atheist Republicans or the Christian Republicans or the hardcore sort of neoliberals, all of them seem to just get stuck in these ruts of conformity and just hate it. It's so mind-numbing. Whereas when you read true philosophy, it's very interesting. You realize this, you're definitely dealing with something else here that's less caught up in just egoism. So I've only gotten a few pages into this book. I don't have a copy of it, otherwise I'd hold it up for you, of course. This is typical in situations, but I think I'm not even going to try to sell you on this idea so much as vent, because philosophy, you know, you don't want to be too pragmatic, because then you're just manipulating it, right? I'm not putting on a show here. Oh God, look at my crazy hair, right? The thing is, I just got out of the shower. I'm not like Severus Snape, like naturally oily hair. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that. And he was a Capricorn too, so props. Not a Capricorn, by the way. I have some of that in my chart. Um, I'll let you try to guess what my sign is. But the thing is about virtue ethics. What Alistair McIntyre says is that at one point, this is his initial premise, and this was not in the lectures that I heard about. It was really actually brilliant. Imagine if you lived in a world. I'm not a big proponent of science. It's one of the ways that I kind of deviate from every culture in many ways. But, 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 but he had this really interesting analogy to science. He said, imagine you lived in a world where we lost scientific method for a while, to a dark age or something, I guess. And when we came back, we had all these words, these scientific terminology. We wouldn't know what it meant. We wouldn't have the tradition, which is something that Capricorns love, the tradition of the scientific method. So we kind of like talk about isomers and polymers and photons and whatever. But we wouldn't know what the fuck that meant. It would just be mumbo jumbo, like pseudoscience, right? That's what usually the term is for it. Like that would be all that it would be. And that would be our knowledge, and yet we would think that that was scientific knowledge. We said that's what happened with our morality. And there wasn't like any definite historical moment that we can point to when it happened. I mean, we can theorize about it. We can't really point to it because people didn't necessarily make a record of it when it happened. It just sort of just happened, and he's aware of it now at his time of writing it. It's especially relevant today. Um, as I can say on my authority as a reader, reading it, and at a bookstore, just surrounded by it, and not just by the books on the shelves, but also the people walking around and just observing them little by little, like that. So what Alistair McIntyre is saying is that we still have moral language, like right or wrong. Um, we still have uh, strong convictions about what things are supposed to be, but we don't really have the initial basis for it anymore. We've lost that. We've lost what it truly means to be a virtuous person. And because we still have the words, there's just so much pretension basically surrounding those things that people will just arbitrarily just use them to get what they want with suspicion, apparently the heartfelt suspicion, heartfelt, that that's what everyone else who's morally preaching is doing, and that underneath it all, it really doesn't mean anything. Very common situation, of course. And he calls this trend emotivism, which is to say that we make our decisions and we make our evaluations purely based on emotion. Even as I talk about this, I'm reminded of this guy named Mike, who's an atheist Republican, and he was convinced. This guy's a Libra and a thinking type. He was convinced that human beings could never be objective because we would always make decisions based on emotions. And he said logic is the only way to be objective, and logic gives you both sides. But because we have our emotions and because we have to act on our emotions, that is that's the only way that we can actually live, and so that mitigates our objectivity. That's a very strange, kind of archaic way. It's a very self-contradictory way of thinking. It took me a long time to wrap my head around, but it was perfect sense to him. And the thing is, Alistair McIntyre isn't talking about that. Necessarily. He is sort of to an extent. I guess now Mike isn't nearly as clear about what he wants to say as McIntyre, so it's hard to say whether he's really going up the same vein. But it sounds as though what Mike is saying is, yeah, we can weigh both sides so we can be civil, and that satisfies that part of us, but fundamentally we'll still do just what we feel like doing. And we'll rationalize it later, but it will never be objective. And Alistair McIntyre also is saying that emotivistic people, which are most people, will just act on what they feel and they'll rationalize it later. Where he's differing in a big way is the notion of moral objectivity. McIntyre says, no, the problem with emotivism is because we could be objective morally, but we're not. And it's just such a deeply entrenched habit, from generation to generation, inherited, of just doing things just because you feel like doing them, that we've lost it. And it's as though he's saying emotions are bad. Feelings, in fact, are facts, and they're one of the ways that we get at virtues. But you don't go straight from a feeling to an ethic. It's not like just because you feel a certain way, you're going to do it. There has to be something more. It can't just be self-contained. It has to refer to something outside of you, which means you have to actually have objective knowledge in order to be moral. And out of that morality comes objective knowledge, and it's this reciprocal relationship. But it's a choice. Like, you can have that reciprocal relationship if you choose it. If you stop being an emotivist and you become a rational, moral being. So this is something I can apply to my own life. Um, but I don't think I need to go into the anecdotal stuff, because this is like a lecture on existentialism, where we absolutely have to delineate every phenomenological detail of what we've gone through in our day. Oh, this is a lot simpler. Um, and yet a little more complicated. I'm going to elaborate on what Alistair McIntyre said, and supplement it with my own reasoning. And even as I'm saying this, I'm already kind of moving into it. The thing is, it's oftentimes a very troubling habit in our society to blame people who are victims. And part of that is because the people defending victims are so pious in defending victims, and sometimes they're acting also very emotivistically. Like, their justice is kind of just an attempt to punish people, and to act like a hero, not necessarily being heroic. Um, that people are inclined, they're tempted to pretend to be a victim when they're not really victims at all. And this is a danger, because how do you know the real victims from the false ones? Well, theoretically, if you've been living long enough a moral life, you'd be able to tell. And really, part of having a conscience is also having the authority to be able to tell when you're a victim and when other people are victims. And if people disagree with you, you can tell them to basically screw off, because you know this and you know that they're lying to you or not really thinking it through. Um, Here's the thing. I realized from my own experience and reflecting on it that the only selfless people, the only truly people who don't have self, so to speak, are totally amoral. They're not immoral necessarily, but they're a different kind of narcissist. It's just there. And the people who are immoral are people who are like that, but they're pretending to be moral. Like I explained earlier. But deep down, they really believe that it's all just self-interest, and their self-interest is not someone else's, and they're just acting it out and doing a lot of harm. But the moral people, they're not selfless, but they're not entirely selfish, because any conviction that you have is yours. When you're conscientious, when you have a conscience, that's a part of your ego, but it's a good part. It's how you know that you're a good person, and if you didn't know you were a good person, you wouldn't have the right to say what's right or wrong. And and you don't have the right to say that nothing's right or wrong. You don't have the right to just kind of stand back because that's no longer in the scope of rights. Human rights have to do with doing what is right. It's not just a human. Otherwise, we would just call it a human entitlement. Okay? And we have to make it clear that entitlements are not necessarily the same thing as rights. But if you're a good person, then they are. And that's a little condescending to people who are selfish, I know. But it's something that can arguably, for most people, it can be transcended. You can become a good person. The point is, like I said, your convictions are your convictions, so it's always going to be in your benefit when what you consider to be fair goes your way. But that doesn't mean that you are selfish or self-interested or the equal of someone who is disadvantaging you. The problem that you encounter, and this is the case with sociopaths like cult leaders, a lot of whom are very popular in such irrational times as ours, sociopaths, they make a distinction between conscience and consciousness and say consciousness is what matters, whereas conscience is just ego. And they claim to be egoless, whereas in fact they're just totally dominated by their ego, and and they skew things in their favor. Um, and the thing is, with conscience, when you have a conscientious person, that person has ego, but just enough to be able to stand up for a value. And this could be standing up for yourself. In fact, I would say that the last person who ever needs to be blamed for anything, in fact, the person who never needs to be blamed for anything is the true victim. And in my own life, the moment when I was most sure that something was wrong was not when I just had the opinion that it was wrong, nor merely when I knew that it was wrong, but it was when I was myself wrong. Because that's the only time that you actually really know, because you're experiencing it so directly, that you know that something's up. You know that something is absolutely awful. Someone made a huge mistake, committed a huge sin. And the great problem with our society is that we tell those people who go through that to get over it. But you can't get over it. If you say to me that I should get over it, you're asking me to supplant my own conscience. See, conscience isn't just about the things that you do. It's also about standing up against the things that other people do. That's extremely important. Because otherwise we'd just be confined to our own egos. And we'd have no way of transcending that whatsoever, no way of being objective, as Dm.A.A would say. So if you put up with something that's unfair to you, and then you follow that example, reinforce that example, you set that example for other people to tolerate it, you create harm. You create pain and suffering and misery by acting the part of the false martyr, not the true martyr, because notice that's another one of those moral words which have lost their meaning. True martyrs are actually incredible people. I don't think I've ever met one in my life, but my research of it, these were people who, if the things that people are saying they did, like, wow, that's pretty insane and amazing and great that they could do that. Now the thing is, victim blaming is a huge problem in abusive relationships between people, between friends who moralize to their other friends and put them in that weak position and then take advantage of that. It can be a problem in love and in competition between, like, let's say, between men for a mate. It can be a problem because we lack what Dm.A.A says is the crucial point of ethics, and that's virtue. there was a time when romantic love was one of the highest ideals, but now we've just reduced it to just biological functions. And somehow, even in establishing that sex is a need and that compassion is a need and having people in your life is a psychological need, we've reduced that to self-interest. We've made it into this social Darwinism where we're just competing for resources and where people become mere resources. And the thing is, how do you know you deserve to be with someone? Not just based on whether that person wants to be with you, because remember, both of you could want to be with one another, but that could still be that could still disadvantage someone else. So how do you know if you deserve it? Well, love itself is how you know. It's just like how anytime that things go your way, anytime that things that you think something should be right and it turns out that way, it benefits you. In the same and anytime that something truly benefits you, you know that it's right. Because yourself is involved in moral decisions. In the same way, love is in the same way as benefit and conviction of a moral sort are contingent. Love and deserving love are contingent. That is to say, if I truly, truly love a woman, I do deserve to be loved back by her. And if she's with someone who loves her less, and maybe this person was a friend who was disloyal to me. See, now I'm revealing a little bit of my story without necessarily intending to. Um, and I trusted that person, and I was a rational being. And this person behaved in a way that was irrational, which I did not predict. Um, that and she's with someone who hurt me and is going to hurt her because he doesn't have respect or love for either of us. I mean, that is morally objective for me to say. If I truly love her, then I can say that and I don't have to put up with it. Now, confronting this individual who's a narcissist, well, I am just degraded and made to feel like, oh, I'm just angry because I didn't get what I wanted. But why shouldn't I get what I want, especially if you're getting what you want? Obviously, there has to be an arbiter in this situation. It's not just her getting what she wants because she might not be getting what is best. It might hurt her in the long run or even immediately. And it certainly hurts me immediately and probably because I know that it'll hurt her. And it's not anything that you can reduce to any one set of things. It's just all contingent. And sure, it's all happening in my head, but it's also happening outside of me. Thing is, I'm a rational person. I put myself in the situation under rational auspices. And as a rational person, there are certain things that I couldn't have predicted because I wouldn't have done them. And if someone else does that, I know that person's not being rational. And it's like, you don't really ever have selfish people taking advantage of each other because they always know one another and they're always kind of involved in this mutual game. And they know they really end up hurting themselves more than they end up hurting each other because they're always trying to protect themselves from each other. And good people don't hurt each other because they're both capable of realizing virtue and like who actually loves this person more or who actually needs this resource more. That's where Marxism comes in. Or, what is the really the best course of action we can take? Not just what you think is best, what I think is best, but what we both know is best. Yeah, the only people who really get taken advantage of are good people, and they only get taken advantage of by evil people because they always make themselves vulnerable. It's not in the nature. It's definitionally not in the nature of a good person to take advantage of an evil person. And you can see how that would play out because the evil person is always doing these unexpected, irrational things. The good person is trying to be rational, at least in a Alistair McIntyre kind of context. coming from the perspective of analytical philosophy, which compares the whole thing to science from the beginning and kind of tries to give us like a scientific knowledge of it. So, so the thing is, my point is, I don't have to put up with being hurt, basically. I should never put up with watching someone that I love go off with someone else. And it's very different from someone who disadvantages me by saying, well, I can't stand watching someone that I like go off with someone else. It's totally different. You know, like it's like Marxism, needs and abilities. My ability is to love this person tremendously. My need is to love this person tremendously. And it's absolutely, here's the thing, absolutely altruistic. And here's why. Anytime anyone is hurt, an empathic, rational person will feel it. At least when he or she becomes aware of it. And if you're really empathic, like to a psychic level, you'll even feel it without even knowing where it's coming from. And that's very imminent. It's very factual. But where it's most imminent and most factual is in the most obvious circumstances, and that is when it's someone that you love very intensely, and someone that you want to be with very intensely because you know you can provide for this person, and you have that virtue, you have that love running through you, and you've earned it. And that person breaks your heart and goes off with someone else who also breaks your heart because that person is supposed to be close to you and just totally screwed you over. See, our culture encourages us to deal with that. And there's absolutely no reason to. The reason that that thing hurts so much, even more than all the other injustices in the world, is because it's so close to you. It's not because you're selfish. It's because you're in so much pain. And the reason you're in so much pain is because you're so intensely attached to and in love with this person. And the cultural superstition is, well, if you're in love with this person, you should just agree with all her decisions and you should want her to be happy. But what if she's being irrational? And what if she's not happy? And what if even being happy isn't even the whole point of love? But it's being virtuous. And what if I know what that means? Because I love her and I'm suffering for her. And yeah, I want her to suffer for me. But that is, in many ways, a higher virtue than being happy. And really, the only way to be non-miserable in that situation is if things go your way. Well, that is what the romantic ideal was. That is what, in more virtuous times which seem bad now because we focus on the rules of those times and we think, oh, how barbaric, people can get away with this. But really, it made sense in the context of virtue. These were the things that gave life human meaning. You suffer to the degree that you are human, and you are human to the degree that you care for other human beings. And love, true love, is when you care so much for that human being that you want to spend all your time on this person. You want to share your body with this person. You want to make all these sacrifices, and you get angry if anyone tries to get in your way. That's a virtue. That is not selfish. What is selfish is if you don't give a fuck and you act in a way that compromises people who do care. And people who care should never have to put up with that. So in a way, this video was my way of venting that frustration. I don't even know. It's my first attempt. I don't even know. Am I even recording audio right now? I don't know how to save this or what to save it to. I hope this computer is good enough, but this is me really at my philosophical best, I think, because I lost a friend to suicide last year, and I was in love with her, and I did everything in my power to protect her. But because I was betrayed by someone who was a bad influence on her, and who was a narcissist and was a selfish person, and because there are all these selfless, immoral people that just were enablers and let it happen, you know, it's been getting to me recently. I've been feeling haunted by her. And I figured instead of, doing an incantation to make a ghost go away, which, believe me, I have done that too. I thought, why not expound on what really matters about being human and honor her memory? Instead of letting it go and getting over and forgetting about her, honoring her memory. And honoring myself too. Being in love is a beautiful place to be. And a lot of our conflicts can be reconciled if we just recognize it as a virtue. And if you're honest with yourself, a situation like, gee, I mean, I could sleep with this person. Do I really love this person? Or am I just using this person? If I don't really love this person, probably shouldn't be with this person, especially if it would make my friends feel used. And if I don't really care that much about my friends, maybe I shouldn't be around them. Maybe I shouldn't create that possibility, which clearly they would not want for me to do. And the fact that they trust me proves that either they've thought it through and realized I wouldn't do that, or it wouldn't even occur to them because they'd never do that to me. And I'd be pretty fucking deluded to say, well, they would do it to me, but they presume they're so awesome that I wouldn't do it to them. It's like, no, 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 no. Narcissists are always going to be paranoid. If I would do it to you, I'm going to take every precaution for them to do it. But hey, if I didn't take these precautions, what does that say about me? I wouldn't do it to you. And it's really shitty if you do that to me. And you could try to justify it by saying, well, she wanted to do it too. That doesn't mean that just because she chose it on a whim, that it was a good thing. And it could have been really harmful for her. And I didn't get what I wanted, but you know what? It wasn't ever really about getting what I wanted so much as about getting what I deserve. And and if you were honest with yourself, you'd admit that you didn't deserve this, and I didn't deserve to have to go through this. And it was crazy and irrational of you to do this, and the only reason you could get away with it was because I was being a rational person. Um, but I'm not gonna try to explain that to people who are like, for some reason, biologically wired to be evil. Um, I'm just gonna leave it at that. So, peace out. Thanks for listening to my first weblog on my new computer. His name is Dexter.